Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Trevor with Maker Experiment, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about laser exhaust systems. Let's get into it. Before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out to Engraving Concepts for sponsoring this video and allowing me to make this content. I'm going to leave their links in the description below. They're actually one of the distributors for the Epilog laser system, and they also carry filtration systems that go with the lasers. So the first thing I want to touch on is why you need a laser exhaust system. When you're machining with the laser system is actually putting off fumes and smoke that you can see inside of your machine. So the purpose of the exhaust system is to take all of that smoke and all of the fumes that are created in the process and pull them out of the machine and away from the optics to keep them clean, as well as to keep a clear path for the machine so that your engraving comes out nice and crisp. If you didn't have this exhaust system, it would basically be a cloud of smoke inside of the machine, and then the beam would be interrupted while you're machining, and it could cause problems. It could damage your lens. A lot of different things could happen. So that is the purpose of the exhaust system, is purely to pull all of that out of the machine and keep it clean for the machining process. When it comes to exhaust systems, there are two main types that I tend to think of. One is an exhaust blower. Some people call it a dust collector. You can often think of it as one of those woodworking dust collectors, just without all the bags. That is the cheapest option when it comes to an exhaust system, and you will have to blow that outside of your space. So let me show you what I'm talking about here in my own shop. All right, so this right here is my blower that I have hooked up to my Epilog Fusion M2 laser. So it is about, I think, 500-ish CFM. Definitely high 400s. And this is the simplest version of an exhaust system. You see the tube that comes out here. This is coming from the back of the machine. It goes into the blower and then exhaust out the other end. From this exit, it actually coils up into that tubing and then goes and exits the wall of my shop right there. And then that just goes out into my yard. So that blower is about 1.5 horsepower. I think I paid maybe $360 or so before taxes. It is by far the cheapest way to go. So if you're on a budget, that's going to be pretty much your only option. Now, one thing with mine, so this exhausts out into the environment, which means that my neighbors can smell it, I can smell it. If it's too close to your air conditioning system or anything like that, it can actually get sucked back into your house and go back through all of your HVAC system. So there are some inherent concerns with that, is you're exhausting fumes and exhausting gases created by all of those materials. So when you're doing that, if you're pumping it outside into the environment, chances are it's getting sucked back into your house somehow, some way. So there are some health concerns with that. And from those health concerns comes the filtration systems. So the other type of exhaust system that I'm going to cover are the actual filtration systems that consist of a pre-filter, a HEPA and charcoal combined filter that you can use in the shop in your space. And what it's going to do is it's going to basically take all of those fumes, turn it all into clean air, and then just bring it back into the environment that you're in. So you don't have to be near a wall or a window or anything else. You can just exhaust it back into the room because it's nice, clean, fresh air. So before we get into them too deep, let me show you the ones that I have. I have one that is a Bofa and one that is a Purex. So these are the two main brands when it comes to these filtration systems for lasers. They're both really good brands. They both do a really good job. They're pretty comparable when it comes to price and features and everything else. But what I want to show you is one that I have linked up to the smaller machine in my shop, and then another one that actually just came in that I'm going to hook up to my larger machine and use for the next couple of months. So first up, I have the Bofa system. So this one is about 220 or so CFM. So I have a nice little electronic interface up here, but what I want to show you is the inside. Once you open the cover, inside of the machine at the bottom here, I have the pre-filter. So if I pull this out, this is what it looks like for the Bofa system. So it's a metal case. It's got the pre-filter inside of it. The main purpose of this pre-filter is to basically extend the life of the charcoal HEPA filter. So this is going to be a less expensive replacement than the HEPA charcoal mixture. The next one, once I unlock it, is the charcoal HEPA filter. From the outside, it looks very similar. So it's a metal box. In this case, it's got the charcoal HEPA combined filter inside of it. It is rather heavy, like super heavy. So with that, you just lock it into place. So when the door is closed and this is operational, all of the air stays within this case. So inside of these systems, the exhaust goes out through the machine, comes in through the bottom and enters the pre-filter. Once it goes through the pre-filter, it enters into the combined filter. So the purpose of the HEPA filter is actually to filter out a lot of the particulates, and it is, they said, like 99% effective in doing that, down to 0.3 microns, which is super small. And if this was a two-stage system, then it would go into the charcoal filter. So since it's combined, it's going through the charcoal filter at the same time. And the charcoal filter is what's getting rid of what they call the VOCs, or the volatile organic compounds. So the VOCs that come out of the laser are the really bad smells, to put it simply. So when you're cutting acrylic and it smells nasty, or MDF and it smells awful, this filtration system is what's getting rid of that smell. So in this case, if you replace the HEPA filter, you're going to replace the charcoal filter at the same time. And then up here behind the top panel is just a bunch of electronics. The next system I have here in my shop is the Purex 800i. So this one goes, I think, up to about 470 CFM. This one did just show up yesterday, and it's going to get hooked up to my Fusion M2 so that I can use it for the next few months. And with that, let me open this one up and show you what it looks like compared to the other one. Now keep in mind that this unit is about twice the CFM of the other one. So this one's meant for a little bit larger machine than the other one that I have. But that being said, both brands make a wide variety of these that go through different CFM levels. So there are equivalent systems for pretty much any laser system that you would be buying. So inside of this one, it's actually split into a top and a bottom. There is a digital display that you can adjust your CFM with, so you can adjust the airflow that you have. So in here, it's the same type of setup. So the pre-filter on this one is a different style. It's not a box. It is more of an accordion style filtration. So it does give it a lot of surface area to go through. And what it's going to do is bring in all of the laser exhaust from the left here. It's going to go into this pre-filter, and it's going to be circulated inside of this bottom space. And then it's going to move up to the HEPA charcoal filter. So once it comes from the pre-filter, it goes up here. And if I unlock this and pull it out, so this, like I said, they're heavy. So this is what it looks like on top. It's kind of just a perforated piece of sheet metal that has filters in between. It is still a combined HEPA filter and charcoal filter. So when you change it, you would just slide it out, slide the new one in, and lock it in place. The nice thing about these systems, this bottom cabinet, is once you close it, the locks are just built in. So it's just a little key turn, and then the lid is locked shut. And for those of you that are nerdy like me and want to know what's up top, There's a little key that comes with the system. So once you open it, it's going to be your electronics. So here on the door, you're going to have your control board and everything else. So in the other part of this, these are the motors and everything that are operating the system and the pumps and whatever else goes into this that are sucking the air up through all of the filters and then exhausting it out through the back. So these are all brushless motors. They should last a really long time, but that's what goes on up in this top compartment. Those are the two types of exhaust systems that I typically see with lasers. So there's this simple exhaust that you just blow it out into the environment and isn't super healthy for anybody. And then there's the filtration system that is more on the health side of it, that filters everything out. And honestly, the main purpose of a filtration system is for the health and safety aspect. Beyond the filtration system and the health and safety concerns, there's not a lot different about the two. So they both exhaust the air from the laser, they both pull it out of the laser machine, and then they get rid of it. One just does it in a much healthier manner than the other one. One of the questions that I get a lot is about the noise level. What is it like to run a laser system with an exhaust fan, and how loud is it really? So what I want to do is I'm going to use an app on my phone. It may not be the most accurate app, but at least it's going to be consistent for all the tests I'm going to run. So if you want to know what I'm using, I'm going to be using an app called Decibel X that looks like this. So it's going to give me an average, a max, and then what it's currently reading at the moment. So what I'm going to do is basically pause this one, restart it, so I cancel it and it's reading 0, and then turn on the simple blower and we'll see what it reads at. So the simple blower is running, it's back against that wall. Let's see how loud it really is. I started out up here by the camera, kind of went closer to it just to see what would happen. So the max that it read at was 70.3. The current one when I stopped it was 70, and the average was 68.2. So that gives you a bearing for where a normal exhaust system would be. So now I'm going to turn on the Bofa, which is about half the CFM. It's not going to mean it's half the noise, but let me go ahead and turn that on and we will do the same test. So you might already be able to tell that it's a very different frequency that it's on. So now, so you can definitely tell that they are completely different sounds. One's more of like a low hum type of sound, one's a little bit higher pitched. The Bofa system was at 67.1 when I stopped it, a max of 67.4, and an average of 64.8. And lastly, I'm going to hook up the Purex. Now keep in mind, the Purex doesn't have the ducting attached to it at all. So it may be a little louder because it can actually have the sound escaping through that port that nothing is connected to. Now that one's turned on, again, you can tell it's a slightly different pitch than the blower, the simple blower is. So on that one, the high was 67.6, the average was 64.6, and when I stopped it, it was 67. When it comes to the noise level, just keep in mind that it's going to depend on your filtration system and the CFM that it's running at. So a higher CFM level will result in a higher level of noise because the fans are working harder to make that happen. So overall, the noise is fairly comparable. I haven't noticed like a drastic difference. It does seem to be a little bit quieter with the filter systems than it does with the normal blower. Now let's get into a little bit of the health and safety aspect. So when it comes to the simplified blower that's just the exhaust fan and it's exhausting out into the air, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. So in some countries, that's illegal. You can't do it. So you're required to have some kind of filtration system. Actually, these units were, I think, originated in the UK because they have laws against exhausting the fumes out into the environment. So if you're in a country that's different from the United States, keep that in mind because you may have a regulation for that and it just may be illegal and you'll have to go with a filtration system. Here in the United States, you don't have to worry about that. So there's no law, at least federally, that prohibits the use of exhaust blowers when it comes to laser engraving. Now, there may be something at the county level or the state level that you need to check into, but by and large, exhaust systems can be used in the United States. Another thing you want to think about is if you live in an HOA. So if you're working out of a house or somewhere that has an HOA, they may have rules against it when it comes to just your neighborhood. So they may have noise things or they may have the fume things. It just depends. So before you decide to go one way or the other, look into local regulations, look into your HOA regulations if you have one. I don't actually have one, so it's not a concern. But you'll also have to deal with neighbors. So if your smells are awful, your neighbors will probably complain if you're using the regular blower system. If you're more on the health conscious side, or you're going to be using the system in an enclosed area where exhausting the fumes outside is not possible, you'll want to look into filtration systems. So a common use for these filtration systems, you'll often see them at trade shows hooked up to the laser machines. You'll go around these gigantic conference rooms and trade show rooms where there's thousands of machines running and they all have some kind of indoor filtration system hooked up to them. So next time you're at a trade show, check out a laser system booth because they'll have one of these systems there that you can look at if the Bofa or Purex brands are not actually at those events. Next up, and arguably probably the thing I should have started with, is the cost. So now that you're sold one way or another, I'm going to probably wreck your dreams because filtration systems are not cheap. So I will say that the regular blower system, when I bought mine, was maybe $360 plus whatever the tubing was, which may have been, another 30, 40 bucks at most. So for less than $400 or around $400, I got an exhaust system for my laser. So let me take the Fusion Edge 12 as an example. So that one only needs a couple hundred CFM. So a regular exhaust blower might be between $300 and $400. Now, let's look into a filtration system. And I'm going to look at my notes here because I have all the numbers written down. So for the Fusion Edge, the actual CFM requirement in the manual says 350 to 400 CFM. Now, an exhaust blower for that is just the blower might run you around $300 to $400 to hook up and be able to exhaust outside. You'd have to have access to a wall or a window or somehow to take it outside of your house. So when it comes to filtration systems, depending on what CFM the manufacturer recommends, those systems can go anywhere from about $3,000 or $4,000 to $6,000 or so, depending on the options. So I know that that is very expensive, and it's not super feasible when you're talking you just bought a laser and the filtration system cost half as much as the laser. I totally get it. It's very difficult financially to make that decision. And in fact, when I first started, I never used a filtration system. And it wasn't until recently that I started using one at all. So the cost is a huge factor that plays into this. So if you're required to have a filtration system, there is going to be that cost to it. Another thing to keep in mind is with a regular blower, there's no real filter maintenance or anything like that where you have to replace parts very often. Typically, it's just the motor with the system that you may have to replace or whatever it may be. and you can replace the whole thing for 300 bucks. So it's a very inexpensive option when it comes to your exhaust. Again, looking at my numbers, when I look at the filter systems, depending on the brand and everything else and your salesperson, the pre-filter is going to run about $300 to $500 depending on the system. And depending on how often you're using the machine, that's going to drive how often you have to replace it. So if you are a light user, so say you're using it 2 to 3 hours a day, the recommendation is you change out the pre-filter every 3 to 4 months. And these are very conservative numbers. So it may be a little bit longer, but if you're using it all the time, so say you're doing it 8 hours a day, or even more than 8 hours a day, you're going to have to replace the pre-filter every 1 to 3 months. So this isn't a small cost when you're talking about the systems, and I totally understand that. And when it comes to the HEPA filter, the cost to replace the HEPA filter is about $750 to $1,000, somewhere in that range. So again, depends on the manufacturer and the salesperson and everything else. But when you're a light user with the HEPA charcoal filter mix, you can get about a year out of it or so, maybe a little bit longer. And if you use it heavily, you're going to replace that every 6 months or so. Keep in mind that the cost is a very big concern for a lot of people when it comes to these filtration systems. If you're on a budget and you don't have the money, you're not likely to get a filtration system. You're more likely to just get a normal exhaust blower. If you are more on the health conscious side, if you have regulations you have to deal with, if you have an HOA you have to deal with, or if you're going to be using the system in a retail space where you're going to have customers coming in, you're going to need a filtration system. So it is going to cost you more money, but it's a little bit more flexible when it comes to where you can take it and where you can run the machine and all of that. So it's very different usage comparisons and very different costs. So the next question is, which one would you choose? And I've touched on this a lot throughout the whole video. If you're on a budget and you don't have a lot of money, you're going to be choosing the regular exhaust system as long as you don't have any regulations that are stopping you from doing that, because it's the cheapest option. And I'm just going to be straightforward with that. If you don't have the funds for a filtration system, I wouldn't recommend it because it's not a cheap thing to do. Now, me personally, if I can afford it, I would always go the filtration system route. So they're healthier for me and my family, and some of the fumes that these machines can put off when cutting acrylic or cutting MDF are obnoxious, and they're terrible. And I have noticed that if I'm exhausting with my regular exhaust fan and it goes outside, it's getting sucked back up into my HVAC system, and it's coming back in my shop. And I notice that I'm getting really bad headaches sometimes, and that to me is a concern because I want to be around for a really long time. So I'm actually trying to switch over to completely filtration systems so that it's my own personal health. Because for me, when I think about it, it is a very expensive upfront cost with a hopefully longer term less cost. So the cost of doing a filtration system to me is a lot less expensive than going to the hospital and having a huge health concern. Now, again, it just depends, because when I first started out, I didn't have the money to do a filtration system. It just wasn't feasible. So I think as you're doing it longer and as you're machining more and as you grow a customer base, I would look into the filtration system if you don't have one already, because of the health reasons. And that's really the only reason to choose a filtration system over a normal blower, is for your health and your safety. So if you're in a country with a law or a regulation prohibiting those regular blowers, you don't have a choice. You're going to have to go with a filtration system. and deal with it that way because it's the law. So keep that in mind too. So the last thing I really want to cover is some frequently asked questions that I have had. And I'm just going to read off my notes because I can't remember them, let's face it. So the first one is, what are the electrical requirements? So depending on the blower you're using, it may be 110, it may be 220. Typically, when you get to the larger laser systems and you're using a filtration system on those, typically they're going to be 220. So with that in mind, when you're doing that, you need to make sure you have the power requirements. And even on the 110, and this is a good point. So one of my 110 systems is a 15 amp breaker plug. And when this one showed up, it's actually a 20 amp plug. So if your electrical wiring is 110, but it's on a 15 amp breaker, your outlet may not match. So just keep that in mind. I will say that when it comes to these systems, it's best if you have a dedicated circuit for the laser and a dedicated circuit, or at least a circuit that can handle the exhaust system and your compressor for your air assist. So typically you don't want the laser on the same breaker as everything else, because if something were to happen, you want the machine to be on its own. The next question is, what CFM do I need? It depends. It depends on the system that you're trying to run. So the CFM requirements for the Epilog Fusion Edge are going to be lower than the requirements for, say, the Epilog Fusion M2 or the Epilog Fusion Pro. It just depends on the laser bed size and how much air you need to exhaust. When it comes to the CFM, another benefit of the filtration systems that I've noticed personally is that the CFM rating I need for a filtration system has been less than the CFM that I need out of an exhaust blower. And a lot of that comes back to how efficiently they run. So the filtration system, with the motors and pumps and everything that it uses and the filters and everything else, the way they operate, they actually do a better job at pulling the fumes out of the system at a lower CFM than a regular blower. Because the regular blower is just, basically a motor and a fan pulling the air, and it's just a much different setup in how it works and how it operates. So when you go to buy a filtration system and you're working with somebody at the company, they know what systems to recommend for the different lasers. So they may recommend one that has a lower CFM than whatever the manual says for the machine. And that is on purpose because it doesn't require as much CFM rating on the filtration system as it may on a normal blower. So don't be shocked if your machine needs, 550 CFM and they're saying you can get by with 470. Another cool thing on the filtration system side is when you're working, if the system is finding out that, it needs more power or whatever to get everything through the system, it's going to automatically kind of adjust on the fly to that. Another thing is some of these systems, you can adjust the CFM to whatever you need. So say that you buy one of the filtration systems for your small laser, but had it rated for a larger one if you decided to upgrade. So you could actually adjust that CFM airflow through the system so that you can just move it from one machine to the other. Now, that only really works in an upgrade case, not necessarily like a day-to-day case, because typically the filtration system is going to be connected to the same machine at all times. But for what it's worth, it does have the adjustment in most cases that you can adjust the CFM rating. Next question is, what is the lifespan of a filter system versus a blower system? When we're talking about lifespans, honestly, if you take care of them, they can last a really long time. Talking like 10 plus years. So as long as you maintain it properly and you do what you're supposed to do, both of them can last a really long time. I've seen people with filters for 10 plus years. I've seen people with blowers for 10 plus years. I've also had a blower die within a couple years. So it's like any other manufactured product. Sometimes they last a really long time when you take care of them. Sometimes you just have a fluke one off that maybe something happened and it doesn't last as long. But by and large, as long as you take really good care of it, you'll be good to go for a pretty long time. Next question, what do I need to do for maintenance? So on a simple blower, you basically just need to disconnect the ducting and clean it out. And that's pretty much all the maintenance there is. On a filtration system, you're going to have to clean out that inlet duct. You're going to have to typically replace pre-filters as well as the combined HEPA charcoal filter whenever the machine alerts you that you need to do it. But other than that, that's the majority of the maintenance. It's not super difficult to do. As you saw before, it's kind of like a pull one out and put a new one in, and it should be good to go. The next question is, do hoses come with the blowers and filter systems? It depends. So most blowers, no, they don't. Typically you're buying them from a woodworking store or maybe Harbor Freight, I don't know. And it's not typically going to come with the ducting to connect to the laser. So you're going to have to buy that separately. On the filtration systems, if it's a smaller system, sometimes they do come with it. Sometimes they don't come with it. But if you ask the sales rep or whoever you're working with, if you can get the hose with it, they will have it as an option that you can add on. It probably won't be included in the cost, but it is something you can buy from them to simplify the process. Next up, what companies should I look at for the regular blowers as well as the filtration systems? When it comes to the regular blowers, there are a lot of options. Mostly woodworking companies are what you're going to look at. So there's Harbor Freight if you're really on a budget and they're super cheap. The biggest thing with exhaust blowers is they typically come with some kind of bag. Do not use the bag. If you use the bag, you're liable to catch it on fire because there are hot pieces going through that exhaust system a lot of the time. So you don't want to use anything that usually comes with the woodworking ones other than just the blower itself. When it comes to those blowers, a lot of different places carry them. So Harbor Freight has them, Rockler has them, Woodcraft has them, the internet has them, Amazon has them. They're pretty much all over. I'll put a link to a couple of them in the description below just to give you an idea of where you can get them at. But by and large, they're pretty easy to find. When it comes to the filtration systems, there are really only two brands I recommend. One is going to be Bofa and one is going to be Purex. So they are very similar. They look almost identical in a lot of ways. They're about the same cost. They have about the same features. They are competitors. They are both very good. So when I think of exhaust systems, I like to think of them just like my lasers. I want a high quality system that's going to last a long time, that's built with quality components. That is going to be Bofa and Purex. I don't really entertain any other brands besides those two. So use that as you may. There are other brands out there that are cheaper, but if it's less, or they're coming in at less than a couple $1,000s, they're probably not great. So I will say that the Bofa and Purex brands have really quality housings that keep all of the bad air in them to go through the filters and everything else, and they work really well. The cheaper ones, if anybody tells you that they'll sell you a filtration system brand new for less than $2,000, I'd be pretty skeptical that it would work the way it's supposed to. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at them. I will say that most of the laser distributors will carry some kind of filtration system brand, or at least tell you where you can buy one from. So just keep that in mind when you're going through it. So the next question is, what do lead times look like, especially now with COVID? So as you may have heard, laser lead times are pretty long because of the computer chips and everything else that goes on in those. When it comes to the filtration systems, a lot of them are in stock and can ship within a week. It may take a week or two to get to you because they're typically shipped freight, and they're not going to come in the mail. So this one actually was shipped UPS freight, so it came in a big crate. The exhaust blowers are about the same lead time. They're typically in stock. They ship out within a week. They may come in faster because they're not always going freight. Sometimes they are shipped through like normal parcel service. But lead times are comparable. You're not really sacrificing a bunch of time. The next question is, do I need to adjust the airflow? So on a regular blower, most likely you don't have that option. On the filtration systems, you have the option. Typically, when they come from the factory, they will have an adjustment that you can change it if you need to. So the best thing to do on a filtration system is look at the smoke. So if the smoke is being cleared out too quick, that may actually be a negative because you're working the motors harder and you're working the system harder, and you'll potentially wear it out faster. So look at the smoke, and if it's being pulled out fairly quickly to clear the optics, that's kind of what you want. Basically, as you're machining, it's pulling it out gradually with it. About the same rate it's creating it is the same rate it's pulling it out. You don't want it to be like a cloud of smoke in your machine because that's going to be bad for the optics. So just keep that in mind when you're setting it up. Overall, that's going to do it for all of the questions that I had. If there are questions I didn't answer, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. I will keep an eye on it and try to get to every one of them. In the end, when it comes to the exhaust systems, it's going to be a personal choice for you. You need to do what's best for you overall. So me personally, I am starting to think more on the health and safety side, and I'm going to be moving more towards the filtration systems. They are more expensive, but my health is more important. So just keep those things in mind as you're looking at these. If you have questions, let me know. I'm going to try to be as honest about my experience with them as possible. Again, I want to give a huge shout out to Engraving Concepts for sponsoring this video and helping me put it together. I really appreciate their support of my channel and helping me make it happen. Hopefully this video has been helpful. If it has, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so that you know when I come out with new videos. If you have ideas for new videos, put them in the comments below. I'm always looking for new things to do, new things to try out, and I'm more than happy to answer as many questions as I can. Also, be sure to check out my Instagram @MakerExperiment, where I share things like this along the way. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you in the next one.